Hello friends and welcome. So, before I get into reviewing the 6 rectifier tubes that I tested in my amp, I just want to say, as you know, over the last couple of weeks I've been, at least the last month, I've been developing this amp. And the only fixed ingredient really that I had is, well, I had to work with my own materials. But I set myself the goal, said let's make something that gets the best out of the Type 50 tube. And the rest is pretty much open, but that was the sort of fixed ingredient, and everything pivoted around this. Because if you do a different tube, for example, you do a smaller triode, then for example 2-stage designs, which I did try for this amp, come into play. And one of the things I can tell you is that of all the things that influences, there is not going to be one rectifier tube or one tube that output tube or whatever that's going to determine or magically turn your amp around. It just doesn't exist. No single thing is going to do. The topology and the whole of the materials is going to do it. Now also, in case of this amp, we've got techniques employed here that actually makes, even though this is a single-ended amp, make the influence of the power supply states less dependent than what you would normally expect. And one of those techniques is, for example, that all the return paths don't run through the power supply. They each have their own AC coupling, AC return path that is very short for all of these 3 tubes. So if you heard the sound clip that I posted earlier, you might have seen that the differences is mostly determined by the whole of the amp, the topology used there and the topology used there, and then the tubes. So, with that out of the way, we can now get into the tubes and just recognizing that topology is important, also in the power supply side. So, in the details of the description details, you'll have details around what the power supply setup is. It varied a little bit, the optimum for each tube, and those details are in the description. They're not in the video, all right? Because I want to keep the video a bit succinct and fast flowing. So let's get into the tubes. Let's start at the bottom. At the bottom is something that comes in this box. It's an RCA DJ4, 5DJ4. This is the high voltage variant of the 5U4. Here's the tube, looks like this. So it's a 3 amp filament at 5 volts. So it requires a bit more power than most of the other tubes. It's a full wave rectifier. Directly heated, has very high emission, has pretty high emission capabilities, much better than the 2 amp volts. And I think I hear that even though the voltage drop is not that much lower than, for example, the 5R4GY here, and its military cousin, the CV717, it's highly dynamic. It's much more dynamic. Nearly on par with the Type 82 there, which has 0 dynamic resistance really once it starts conducting. So, however, its downside, and the reason why it's at the bottom, I found it washed out its sound. It became grayish. Yeah, I couldn't describe any good qualities except for dynamics. Now, the nice thing about this tube, and the reason why I've got it here, is because it was substantially, it's a very affordable tube. So I wanted to try it. It's much more affordable than 5U4, perhaps for good reason. However, if you want a tip, if you're building a push-pull amp or a differential amp, where the power supply really doesn't matter that much, because anyway, because of reasons, but this might be a budget tip to actually work with if you still want a directly heated rectifier in your tube. So that's at the bottom. One up from the bottom is, I would say, this tube. Maybe surprisingly. the 5R4GY. Now this is a tube that I used to really like because it sort of added a really nice tone, and the mid upper bass, sort of that region, gets a nice little boost. Sort of seems a bit of a taut bass with a little bits of seemingly warm distortion or something, like almost second harmonic like type of thing, if you can speak of that. It sort of seems to do that in the bass region. However, and this is completely unexpected, but I found this tube to be smearing, and given that what I've done here is that the Type 50 is highly transparent, this lets you notice anything about changes in your amp. And the 801A, of course, is one of the amongst the world's most revealing tubes. It passes on the most dense music information of any tube. Like many tubes, if you swap this out for other tubes, those other tubes will just sound broken. So, but it's a tricky tube to implement. However, given the nature of this revealing, despite its 3 stages, the revealing nature of this amp, this smearing became more and more obvious, and as my ears sort of started tuning into this, it became more and more annoying, this tube. So I think it's an RCA, but the light brown bass, I think. Yes. So hence that tube ended up 1 from the bottom. Then now this is a difficult one, these next 2 tubes, because they're very close, but they're slightly different. I'm going to go with the CV717 as the next from the bottom. So that's on number 4. This one doesn't have the sort of euphonic influence that the 5RGY is. This is just a military version of that tube, but it also doesn't have the smearing, so it's a step up. For the rest, like this tube, initially everything seems just fine and dandy, just reasonable dynamics, reasonable transients, flow and harmonics and so on. It handles complexity quite very well, really. Where this tube smears a bit, this smears a lot less, and therefore it ends up a little bit higher, despite sort of having initially And I also felt that little the mid upper bass thing is less pronounced here, so it's more neutral. And that, okay. So a very tiny step up to this is, but it comes at a cost, is the Type 80. So this is one of the oldest rectifiers. I can't tell you what brand it is. It's an ST shape, Type 80. This tube is I find it a bit sluggish, even if you put 2 in parallel with each other. And by the way, most of these tubes I tried out in parallel where I could. For example, I also combined these 2 together as one as a positive phase and the other as a negative phase, so the diodes put in parallel. And that seems to balance each other's faults out quite nicely. You heard that in one of my earlier posted the For All We Know sound clip. That was these 2 playing. So not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but Type 80, back to the Type 80. Very nice tubes, a little bit sluggish, smoochy, but very clear, can handle complexity really nicely. What I found is that I needed to I also did this to combat its sluggishness. I actually put a smaller cap at the end, so instead of 135 microfarad, I actually went with 90 microfarad, and I went from a 10 Henry choke with iron core to a 7 Henry choke with an amorphous core, and that sort of seemed to compensate. But it also, because of the amorphous core, slightly changes the sound a little bit, but that making the rest of the circuitry faster to compensate for its lack of speed worked very nicely. And then it doesn't have the smearing effects nor the sort of boring effect that this tube has. And that was actually quite nice. And I think there are Type 80 tubes out there that are even better than the ones I've got here. And now we're getting to number 3. Surprisingly, number 3 is probably the Type 82 there. I just realized this is actually a top 7. I don't know why I thought it was a top 6, but that aside. Type 82. And again, this is a hard choice between that one. And the reason is the Type 82 is a very vibrant, I sort of see it as a young stallion. It's just ready to gallop away and run away and just bolt out of the gates. That's the type of sound you get with this. It is not doesn't have the strongest bass of all the of what I tested here. It has very lively dynamics. So what I found is, especially when there's you know, jazz instrumental solos, in an orchestra having a lead instrument or so, with this tube and older recordings with this tube, it just seems that the life that a musician brings into the instrument and just try to express themselves, especially in sort of the amplitude type of way. So not necessarily so much in the movement, in the emotional side of things, but more with the direct energy, what you hear if you, for example, in row 6 or so in a classical thing, or you're standing close to a band or a violinist or a piano. It doesn't really matter which instrument. You really feel the difference in flow, but not as harmonizing flow or something, but more in the pianissimo becomes really quiet, and then when it comes up and it strengthens the music, you really, this tube makes no bones about it. It will let you feel that, and it really is explosive. So that's what is the strength. What that also does at the same time is that I feel that the harmonizing aspect of a whole orchestra playing is just not there. Like, it just shifts the focus, I feel. So very nice tube with very specific qualities. But because I find it is a little bit over the long term, I find myself gravitating more towards the top 2 tubes, and that's the reason why it's sitting at number 3. As a practical result, I might make the amp switchable, by the way, which I didn't mention really, but that's how I tested these tubes. I installed an extra switches here, so I actually could switch between a pair there and a pair there. That is the switch, so I could do quick comparisons, and that switch there is just a warm-up mode. So basically the B plus for this amp is between 500 and 520 volts, but this is about 270 volts in warm-up mode. So and that just protects the tube. I'll wait a couple of minutes until it is nicely warmed up. Also, I'm not with that setting there. You know, none of the tubes are just standing by and not emitting anything. There's always a little bit of B plus on the plates, but not, I don't think, enough to actually damage anything. It's at very low milliamps. So then, number 2 tube. That is actually a TV damper, and you need 2 of these. Comes in a nice box actually. It's the 6CG3. Interesting construction, like a copper plate, I think, to get rid of the heat. So these draw quite a bit of current. They need 1.8 amps at 6.3 volts, and you need 2 of these because it is a half-wave rectifier. But with the lowest voltage drop of any of these tubes in the range where I use it. So that drops 15 volts, and that doesn't change. Once it starts conducting, it basically shorts, which is the nice thing and probably the reason for the sound that it has. This one has, I think here in my amp, only 5 volt drops. It's a very low voltage drop, has huge emission capabilities, huge voltage capabilities. So, and also you get for free, you get a slow warm-up when you use this tube, because it takes about 20-25 seconds to warm up and start conducting. So that tube has much of the sound that I associate with the 82. However, it is far more, I find it far more balanced. I don't find that the sound, because this is an indirectly heated tube, that it's any less than the directly heated. Yeah, not as far as I can tell. Very good dynamics, very good bass, but doesn't have the it retains more of its composure, and it sounds quieter and blacker than with the 82, and that might be a side effect maybe of that this tube, of all the rectifying devices known to man, these are the least noisy. They have the least, the smoothest responses in rectifying. That's why some people use them. They're just the most perfect operating tubes at the cost of drawing a bit of current. So that is number 2. And just by the way, if you're ever going to consider, this is actually Compactron tube, so it has 12 pins. Now if you have normal tube sockets and you don't do anything with them, this is very hard to get into the socket. So what you want using, and then it becomes a really easy insert. So that's my tip for using Compactron sockets with these. Finally, the winner of this test, which I enjoyed the most, and I must say it's not because of first value, but just the long-term balance between transients, liveliness, and harmonizing aspects, the coherence in a whole performance, the whole music comes together, and just a nice sound that you just want to keep listening to. That's the 5R4 GYB. So that's again the military cousin of the 5R GY, the military/industrial application. It's a bit more robust. It can handle a bit more capacitance on its input. Of course, I don't do that because that ruins the sound, but it can. So it's probably better built. In this case, it's an RCA again, I think, but I could be wrong because I don't see any markings on it. Definitely US made, that's what it says. Yeah, that sort of seems to have the best of both worlds. I also, you'll see this this tube was actually featured in my last video, sound clip video. So if you want to do a comparison yourself, you get the chance to compare these and to compare with that one. So that's it for this. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you get some ideas. If you want to build an amp and you want to use a tube rectifier, these are some of the options. Again, topology is important, so your results may vary as you vary your topology. However, it does seem generally that bad tubes are bad tubes in any circuit, and the better ones are better ones in other circuit. But you just do need to tune your circuit to work optimally with the characteristics of the tube and the topology that you're using. So that's it for now. That's my review of these 7 rectifier tubes. Thank you for watching. Thank you to those that support my channel via Buy Me Coffee. You don't need to subscribe even to give donations to the channel. It helps a lot. It matters a lot. It makes a huge difference. And next we'll change gears. We'll get a different type of video. We're gonna change subjects. So yeah, please subscribe if you haven't, and I hope to then catch you in the next video. Until then, take care Bye bye. See ya.